So I'm presenting next. If you could help me put the PowerPoint on. I'll sit here and move slides from here. I'm Irit Dekel. I'm teaching in Indiana University, Germanic Studies and Jewish Studies. And I'm Jeff's student too. Okay, I'm going to talk about reflections on writing together about politics and small things. Jeff, you ask in Politics of Small Things, how do people make history in their social interactions? How does analysis that is both focused on action and experience, as well as on its effect on history, is practiced? In reading your work and in being your student, I answer in discussion in continued deliberate attempt at understanding details, relations between them, and in letting those details lead us in our analysis. Jeff, as a teacher and author, proposed to look up close at institutions and movements to learn how spaces for democratic practices are constituted in established, nascent, and troubled democracies, as we already heard today. This empirical focus rests on a theoretical work with Hannah Arendt, Irving Goffman, Georg Simmel, and others. It is inspired by artworks such as plays, film, and fiction, attuned to processes of their creation, content, and beauty. It shaped and informed my inquiries since my time at the New School for Social Research, for which I'm most grateful. In Jeff's work, the politics of small things is an ascendant political force, as we heard in the former two presentations. Jeff insists that we look at emerging groups of political actors, not only because this is a way to do justice to often silent groups, but also in order to understand a mode of action that they develop, their interventions, embodiment, and how they interact with and shape media. In reading Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things, Jeff proposed an additional powerful analytical tool to connect small and large in the fashion of sociological imagination through the lips that we also heard from Siobhan Carthago, through the lips that only fiction, in its commitment to potentiality, to the unsaid and not yet done can utter. Jeff claims with Hannah Arendt, when people freely meet and talk to each other as equals, reveal their differences, display their distinctions, and develop a capacity to act together, they create power. In my book in progress, provisionally titled Witnessing Positions, Figures of Memory in Germany, one chapter focuses on two activist groups in the city of Berlin, the International Women's Space and the Literary Middle East Union, the MEU. I'd like to tell you about the first, and then going to slide 2. The International Women's Space was created by migrant and minority groups, asylum seekers, exiled women, and feminist anti-racist activists in Germany. I analyzed how the group's action creates a space of appearance, accountability, and mobility within a landscape that is often barren for them as migrants and people of color in Germany. In the spirit of the politics of small things, I study events organized by the International Women Group, which took place virtually and in person during 2020 and 2021. I additionally analyzed reporting in the German press on those events, as well as on groups publications such as books and radio podcasts. This is their website. This is the radio podcast. Also pay attention to the joy in this picture and that it appears on the website. And also on books that they publish, which you'll see in a second. The International Women's Space members reflect on women's experience as migrants, structural racism, misogyny, and violence. Those interventions help us recognize that in discourse-based political action, city residents reflect on questions of equality and visibility for themselves, as well as for other groups. The presence and action of such groups in the city of Berlin and their participation in, as well as enclosure from, the public sphere during the pandemic enables them to fashion a creative space in cooperation and intersection with other city residents. What is novel about this self-realization is that it is not facilitated or overlooked by the putatively cosmopolitan society, host society, but is rather based on a cooperation among metropolitan residents speaking and publishing in the languages spoken by their members. You saw the various languages in the former slide. Those spaces of plurality could proliferate without the approval of cosmopolitan society, which is not open for them in life and in work opportunities. In their tradition of looking for everyday action or small things, as I learned from Jeff, I want to share with you an image of a sycamore in Berlin with two persons occupying it in August 2021. Observing this image and its circulation affords us perspective on the spectatorship of their potential audience in relation to questions of rootedness, activism, habitable city space or not, as well as political and social empowerment. I'd like to lead the rest of the discussion today of the space of appearance created by the International Women's Space in observing this image. This photo, published on the International Women's Space website in August 2021, you'll see it in a coming slide, shows two persons occupying a sycamore tree in Oranienplatz. It's in the majority neighborhood, or the migrant majority neighborhood in Kreuzberg in Berlin, formerly West Berlin. One of the two persons is activist Napuli Langer, who migrated to Germany from Sudan and occupied this very tree in 2014 to resist the evacuation of protest camp, that has previously stood there between 2012 and 2014. In Oranienplatz, by that actual tree, that was the camp. It was evacuated in 2012. It was created in 2012, evacuated in 2014. They occupied the tree in 2014, returned, and then in 2021, returned again, and I'll tell you why. The other person is an Afghan activist whose name is not shared for their safety. Langa had returned to occupy the tree in order to demonstrate the denial of Afghan refugees and the right to remain in Germany in 2021. That's the reason. As reported in 2021 in the left-leaning daily Tageszeitung. And this picture appeared not only on the website, but in different media outlets in Germany. We're going to talk about that very briefly. In referring to the history of the tree occupation by the same activist, the International Women's Space direct attention to solidarity between different minority groups in enacting their intention to stay. The activists call attention to the cityscape, to the choice of safety and protest from a tree in Oranienplatz, and the circumstances that forced them to take this extreme measure. In their action, they re-signify for passerby, as well as for those looking at the photo, the precarity, displacement, their permanent status of quite literally hanging between heaven and earth. The horizons of possibilities summarized by an unattainable citizenship. In this sense, the International Women's Space website significantly also contributes to a network of refugees, migrants, deportees, and exiles, and to archiving and communicating the history of their mobility and confinement. These are not small things, but in Roy, as well as in Goldfarb's writing, they're made significant through attention to the choice, the place, the symbols used. The discomfort and danger of falling was central to the weekly Bitzeit depiction or report of this occupation of the tree, because the refugee has to appear in need, although they appear in several ways otherwise. And they're made to seem to be in need, although we know they deemed or they demand change from a position of sovereignty they got on a tree. The politics of small thing in turn is elsewhere, a powerful tool to trace and analyze change in a possibility of an empirical and discursive analysis of the specific constitution of a public or a person and personhood, and of the potentiality in politics. In tours, in publications, in book publications, they published 3 books, the International Women's Space, podcasts, and online published conference recordings. These witnessing platforms, here I refer to the work of Robin Wagner-Pacifici, invite public reflection on state-promoted convictions regarding migration and citizenship, in witnessing the past, in which other groups bore witness. The International Women's Space asks, crucially, how do we witness the present? What perspectives can we hold in solidarity between women of different backgrounds? In their actions, there is no tension between bearing witness and acting. Both witnessing and political action emanate from the possibility of addressing issues of public interest, as I learned from Jeff, and in a commitment to a plural public in social settings that often celebrate their openness, but are less likely to acknowledge its power as emanating from diversity of backgrounds. Social scientist studies often look at larger state and municipal power structures and reaction to them from the position of what the state does or says, and to a lesser extent, how its contingent others react. This study joins a small number of works which F. Goldfarb's Politics of Small Things is exemplary of. It focuses on solidarity action by minority groups who activate and perform public appearance. The international women's space activists do not only intervene by connecting past atrocities to present discrimination. They additionally grounded a new group called Women in Exile, as the website Women in Exile and Friend reported in their 2021 action, Women Moving Against Lager Racism. The two actions were intended to show the connection between the pogroms against Vietnamese migrants, asylum seekers, and Roma in Rostock in August 1992, just after unification, and the emergence of isolation camps in Horst and the racist, restrictive discrimination asylum laws in 1993, because just specifically the attack on that building was an attack that developed and wasn't stopped by the police, and after that, camps were built. In this, I'm going to applause. In this example, the international women's space mobilized for the memory of violence against migrants in the years following the fall of the Berlin Wall, joint action for the visibility and impossibility or impossible mobility of migrants and exiled women in Germany since 2015, where the city of Berlin is related to as a center of accountability, potential visibility, and diverse discussions. The International Women's Space offers intervention and resistance in the International Women's Day. Demonstrations on March 8th every year. Since 2019, it's a federal day of rest in Germany. And in Lager report, as you saw, from different encampments for asylum seekers around Berlin. After the COVID pandemic started, the International Women's Space could no longer visit refugee detention camps or lagers as part of their break isolation group action. In reaction, with some of the International Women's Space members themselves locked in those lagers, they started the Lager Report, which joins the International Women's Space Radio to report, discuss, and analyze the situation of women in the context of the COVID pandemic. The report substantiated the mediated space of appearance, of which I learned from Jeff. The actors use a particular rhetoric of activation, call attention to the report, which merges witnessing and action. For example, here, this is Lager Report number 62, posted in June 1st, 2021. You see the declaration that opened it. The speaker, whose name was not shared, first declared that she appears in front of listeners. She draws attention to the power of her observations and to what she is going to say from her specific positions, which grants her authority. This stated proximity turns her listeners to an audience, a public, and witnesses turned into what she will report on, or tuned into what she will report on. She uses a discursive position that foregrounds the referential function of language, her power to represent. From this position, she can demand state accountability. International Women's Space itself became a site for present and possibilities of shared future appearance, wherever this space activation is summoned from. These witnesses are attenuated, co-present, and are invited to provide an account of what they know, thus being responsive and dialogical. They are not powerless. They affect the stories about migrants' rights, cities, and state policies. And with the politics of small things, we have the example and means to see both the outcomes of their efforts, the spaces they activate and appear in, and then the actors. Thank you.